Trevor Weston, Dr. Trevor Weston, here in his office at Drew University. Let's jump in, start from the beginning. Can you tell us about your musical upbringing, how you got into music at all, about your parents, the whole setup?
So the story goes, when I was, I think, around 6 years old, my father, I grew up in Plainfield, New Jersey. My father was singing at Grace Episcopal Church, and I think he was learning one of the solos in the Seven Last Words by Dubois. And apparently, I mean, he was taking voice lessons, but really relied on recordings. And he was listening to the same aria and over and over and over and over again. And I walked in the room and said, "Daddy, you don't know this yet?" And I sang the whole thing. So he took me to the director and said, he's kind of young, but maybe he can, join the choir. So I think at age 6, I joined the choir. And while I was there were members of that church, Grace Episcopal Church, who had sent their sons to St. Thomas Choir School in New York City. And they said, Trevor's a great candidate for that school. So I went to St. Thomas, was there 4 years, obviously under the direction of Jerry Hancock, became more interested, learned a lot more about music, and I guess kind of the rest is history. I left St. Thomas, went to New York Academy down the street, started organ lessons with the organist at Grace Church. His name was Charles Stein. And I don't know, I guess I went to college, not sure if I wanted to continue organ. For a while I played with the idea of going to conservatory, and then realized that I love playing the organ, but I don't like playing in front of people, which was a problem. But I'd done music my whole life. So I applied to Tufts because I knew that Tufts had and still has a program that connects with NEC, and I thought, well, if I changed my mind, I could somehow make that connection. But while I was there, I met T.J. Anderson, the composer. He heard me playing the organ and kind of revealed to me that you can major in music and not be a performer, or you can do something like composition. And he really put me on the path. As I like to tell people, he kind of pulled me out of the gutter of my view of what music is and kind of expanded it. And then after that, I went to graduate school, studied with Ollie Wilson, and I guess the rest is history, or something to that.
Wonderful. Thinking back to your boy choir days, your men and boys choir days, do you think that still plays a part in your composition today?
Yeah, it has a huge impact. I think and I've been thinking about this for a while, the moment I went to St. Thomas to interview, I remember walking into the church and they were rehearsing the Allegri, Miserere, and I think we were working on the same piece at Grace. It was around Lent, but it sounded so different, and it kind of hit me emotionally. And I think at that moment I realized that music was more than just fun and interesting. It had this other power. And while singing at St. Thomas, there was this kind of understanding of kind of responsibility of performing well and what that meant. You were doing this service, literally a service, but also music had this higher kind of import for people, and that was serious and important. And my father was an interior designer, but he was an artist. My uncle, his brother, was a fashion designer, so being creative was always important in my house. My mother made dresses and made clothes, but I think at that moment I realized what all of that meant. And when it comes to writing music, even though it took me a while to write choral music, I think I always connected words and images and sounds. Singing psalms, just singing pieces where there was a lot of text painting. So I think I've always had this understanding that music should maybe tell a story or communicate something. In a service, or I think in any religious, faith, the music is there not just for entertainment, but to communicate something that the words alone cannot. And there's something about singing, if you just go through like human history, the beginning of the Iliad, I think starts with rage, goddess, sing. So singing is kind of a higher level of communication, and music has this higher level of kind of communicating. So I think really, without realizing at that moment, it started me on this path of kind of seeing music as being this kind of important way of humans kind of communicating important information. And that has stuck with me.
Yeah. Do you remember the first thing you wrote?
Wow. Yes, I do. So I'm laughing because I remember the second thing. I'll tell that story too. The first thing I remember writing, the piano that's still at my family's house in Plainfield, we received from my grandfather after he died. And I remember writing this little piece, which was really just, and look at the piano, I think it was A minor, rhythmic pattern, to G major, to F major, and then back again, over and over and over.
Mm-hmm.
I think I was in sixth grade. And then I wrote this other piece that, again, just chords like D minor, and then another chord pattern. But sometime, after I wrote little pieces, but I think after St. Thomas in high school, I really started to write, I think, pieces that imitated famous pieces like the Chopin E minor Prelude. And there's a piece I wrote after my freshman year of college, before I studied with TJ, that to me sounded like Chopin. But it's the first time I wrote something, and we were playing it, and someone went by and said, what is that? That sounds familiar. And I thought, I've tapped into this language. Like, I'm not just saying words, I can actually construct, sentences that communicate something. And that's really the first time I thought, maybe I could do this. Mm-hmm. Maybe I could be a composer. Because someone was able to interpret or at least understand what I was saying. So that's the first thing I remember.